Right, so by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly how much capital you actually need for any HMO deal. Not some rough guess, the actual number. You'll know what your monthly profit's going to be after every single cost. Not just rough estimates, but real cash flow. And you'll know whether the deal's actually worth doing before you commit a single penny. Not just blindly hoping it works out, but having a clear yes or no answer. And I'm going to show you the spreadsheet that I use to analyze every single deal. And I'm going to break down each section and explain why it matters. And then I'll fill one in live with real numbers. A 3-bed terrace going to a 6-bed HMO conversion. So you can see how it actually all connects together. And best of all, you can download it for free at the end. So if you want to know whether your HMO deal is actually going to make you money, this is how you do it. Let's get into it. Hi, I'm Jim Holland from Dan and Jim Property, which I run with my brother in the northwest of England. We buy houses and rent them out, either as whole properties or by the room. And I've just completed my first HMO conversion, where we took a 3-bed house and turned it into a 6-bed property and raised 160 grand in the process. Right now, I'm focused on filling my pipeline with 3 to 5 projects over the next 12 months, working towards my goal of building a portfolio of 50 HMOs. My bigger vision is to create freedom for myself and others through property, whilst providing high quality housing that people are actually proud to call their home. So if you want to follow along for the journey and learn about HMO conversions and property investing, hit the subscribe button and let's grow together. So the first section of the spreadsheet is property overview and room sizes. And this matters because before you can even think about making an offer, you need to know if the property can actually legally work as a HMO. Now, there are national minimum standards and there are local standards as well. And you need to check both. Nationally, every habitable room has to be at least 6.51 square meters. Your local council rooms are never going to be smaller than the national standards, but they might have quirks around en-suites and different stuff like that. So it's always worth checking your local council guidance first. Generally, my advice would be to exceed these minimum standards, because you want to create high quality rooms that attract good tenants. Don't just aim for the bare minimum. If a room's under the minimum, you can't get a license for it, which means you can't legally rent it out. Now, you can use the measurements from estate agent listings to do your initial analysis, but I'd always recommend doing a full viewing and measuring properly before you actually commit to anything. And here's something a lot of people miss out. You need to measure the head height of the room as well. If you're doing a loft conversion or a dormer, the ceiling height needs to be over 2.4 meters in the loft. If it's not, you're going to struggle. At this stage, you're starting to formulate what your floor plan is going to look like, where the en-suites are going to go and where the studios are going to go as well. So you need to understand how big a room actually needs to be to fit an en-suite or a studio in it. And that's going to be driven by your local council guidance, because studios and en-suites need more space than standard rooms. So many people offer thinking they can get 6 beds with 4 studios. And then they measure it properly and realize the rooms aren't actually big enough. Then suddenly, nightmare, the deal doesn't work. This section forces you to think through all of these details before you commit. It tells you how many licensable bedrooms you actually have, and what type of rooms you can create, and whether the layout's going to work. Not just what you hope's actually possible. And ultimately, that's the foundation of the whole deal, because your rental income is driven by bed count and room type. Get that wrong and everything else falls apart. Next up, we've got our buying cost. And this is where most people get their deal analysis completely wrong. They look at the purchase price and think that's all they need. It's absolutely not. There are so many hidden costs just to acquire the property, and let me walk you through the key ones. First up, solicitors. Now, they handle all the legal work for the purchase. Next up, we've got a valuer. Now, we'd always recommend getting a pre-valuation, even if you're using investor finance like we are in this example. In this deal, we're using fully private investor funds, not bridging finance and not development finance. Just invest the money. But I'd still get a pre-valuation done, because bridging companies make you do this so they can manage their risk. And it tells you what the valuer thinks the property is going to be worth at the back end. So even with investor finance, I'd recommend doing this because it protects your downside risk. Next up, architects. Now, they're going to do all your drawings to the correct standards, building regs, and if you need any planning as well. So it goes without saying, you need someone competent here. You can't just look at the plans yourself and hope they're right, because you're not a builder, so you need to get a professional involved. Next up is broker fees. Now, you want to use a broker to access the correct finance. Generally, this could be a flat fee or a certain percentage of the loan. Next up, stamp duty. It's 7% on most investment properties. That's 10.5 grand on a £150,000 purchase. You can't avoid this, sadly. Next up, furniture. You want to kit out every single room with bed, desks, wardrobes, sofas, and maybe some kitchen equipment. You don't want to cheap out here. Another one you can't get away from is HMO license, which is mandatory for 5 beds or more. So you need to check your local council for this fee. Then you've got building control, fire risk assessments, and EPC, which are all compliance stuff. If you don't budget for these up front, you can run out of money before you've even started the refurb. So this section forces you to list every single cost, and it makes sure you know exactly what you need before you start. Next up is build cost. This is the section that goes wrong the most often, because no refurb ever goes to plan. You think it's going to cost 80 grand, and it ends up costing 120. The roof might need work, the electrics are a mess, and the central heating system's all over the place. This section makes you think through every element of the build before you start. Now, if you're doing a full back to brick refurb like we did on our 3 to 6 bed conversion, everything's getting ripped out. So that means full rewire, full new central heating system, and every single little thing is going to be brand new. And if you're going from a 3 bed to a 6 bed with a loft conversion and an extension, these are major structural works, which normally mean major costs. Here's where you need to start building your local knowledge. You need to know what builders in your area are charging for different types of work. How much does a loft conversion cost? How much does an extension cost? What's a full back to brick HMO refurb look like? Start collecting this data from your area, because costs can massively depend on where you are in the country. For example, where I am in the Northwest, probably going to be cheaper than if you were doing the same type of project in London or the Southeast. So speak to builders, speak to investors, get quotes, and understand what the going rate in your market is. And you need to break down each element: loft conversion, extension, main refurb, interior designer, and project manager. Now, interior designer and project manager aren't something we used on our first project. But if you're not geographically in the area, or you're in a super competitive market where your product needs to stand out, it might be worth budgeting for these. But the most important line in the whole section is contingency. I'd suggest 15% minimum. Most people don't add contingency, and that's when they run out of money when things go wrong. Doesn't matter how good you are at planning, you just don't know what unexpected things are going to come your way. For example, on our project, we had to rebuild a whole internal wall, which ended up costing us a couple of grand. We didn't find this out until the rip out stage, because it turns out the wall wasn't actually that secure. So that's something we didn't realize until we got into the build. And that's exactly why you have a contingency when things like this happen. This contingency section protects you from that risk, as much as possible anyway. It forces you to be realistic about the build cost and then add a buffer, because things go wrong, they always do. And it's when you haven't budgeted for it, that's when it's tears at bedtime. And you can't finish the project, you can't refinance, and you can't rent it out. Ultimately, it means the deal could die. That's why the build cost section is so important. Next is the cash flow forecast, everyone's favorite bit. This tells you if the deal's actually going to make you money every single month. You could have a great purchase price, you could have a cracking refurb, and you could have a super duper GDV. But if your monthly costs are higher than your monthly rent and you're losing money every single month, that's not sound. Now, before you even get into this section, you need to know what rents are doing in your area. What does an ensuite room rent for, and what does a studio room rent for? So you need to jump on spare room and do some proper research, because your rental income is the driver for everything. And when you're filling in this section, use conservative figures. This is your worst case scenario, because if you're happy with the cash flow in your worst case, then you can definitely proceed. And then you can optimize for the best case once you're live. But you always need to understand the worst case situation. This section forces you to think through every single monthly expense, not just the mortgage, absolutely everything. Letting agent fees, council tax, utility bills, gas, electric, water, Wi-Fi, maintenance, voids, and insurance. And this is where HMOs are more complicated than buy-to-lets, because generally there's just a lot more moving parts and a lot more costs. And most of the time, people forget a lot of these. They just look at rent minus mortgage and think that's profit. It's absolutely not. Your actual profit is what's left after every single cost. And this section makes you face that reality before you buy. If the number at the bottom is negative, the deal doesn't work, so walk away. If it's positive, you know the property will generate actual cash flow every month. And shockingly, that's the difference between a good investment and a money pit. This section should tell you what you're looking at. Now, GDV stands for gross development value. That's the back-end valuation once all the works are done. This section tells you two main things. First, what the property's worth after you've converted it. And second, how much capital you can pull back through refinancing. This matters because if you can't refinance and recycle your capital, ultimately you can't scale and grow your portfolio. You do one deal and your money's stuck and that's it. But if you can refinance and pull most of your capital back out and you can go again and do another deal and another and another, that's how you build your portfolio. Now, HMO valuations don't work like normal residential properties. They're not based on comparables, they're based on yields. You take your annual gross rent and divide it by a yield. and that gives you your GDV. Now the yield depends on your area. Higher yield areas will give you a lower valuation. Now generally, I look for HMOs where I can get these commercial valuations. So 6 beds with all en suites and studios. We know we can get commercial valuations on those deals, but this is where it's important to have a good relationship with your broker, because they'll be able to find the lenders that will do commercial valuations on your HMOs. And this is critical. You need to find out what the yield is for your area. Again, this is where you need to work with other investors, try and speak to valuers and do your research. Because if you're miles off on your yield, it can completely destroy the deal. This is the key thing for understanding if the deal stacks. Now, once you understand all of your purchase costs, buying costs, and build costs, then we know how much money we need to raise from private investors. That's exactly how we did our first deal. We ran the numbers and we knew the total capital required, and we raised £160,000 from private investors. And then we used bridging and development finance. If you're someone who's looking to work with investors like us on HMO projects, make sure you fill in our investor waitlist in the description below. Once you understand the GDV, the bank will then lend you 75% of that GDV. And if you're using investor funds, you pay their capital plus interest back from the refinance. And what's left over is the capital you've got tied up in the deal. And this is where return on capital employed comes in. And I think that's the most important metric. I'll show you exactly how that works in the worked example in a minute. But this section calculates whether the deal's worth doing. Not just whether it makes money, but whether it makes enough money to justify your time and risk. And that's a massive difference. So once you've worked through all those sections, you need to understand what your verdict is going to be. Is this a good deal or not? And there are 3 main things I think you need to look at. First off, monthly net profit. Now for me personally, I'd be looking for at least £1,000 a month minimum. Second, return on capital employed. Now for me, again, I'd be looking at above 30%. And third, how much capital are you leaving in the deal once you've refinanced? Now each investor is going to have different metrics for this, but you need to figure out what works for you. Do you have cash flow targets? Is this deal going to meet them? How hard do you want money left in the deal to work versus maybe other assets or investments you've got? And how much capital do you have to actually leave in these deals? Now these are all personal decisions and there's no right answer. But generally, if your monthly cash flow is a decent positive number, your return on capital employed is above 30%, and the capital left in works for your situation, I'd say it's a good deal. If any of them fail, you need to question whether it's worth doing. And hopefully this spreadsheet gives you a clear yes or no. No guessing, no hoping, no emotion, just the numbers. And that's how you make money in property. So I've given you an overview of why each section of the spreadsheet matters. Now I want to show you exactly how we use this spreadsheet with a real example. So I'm going to jump in and fill in for a 6-bed HMO conversion and show you how all these sections connect together. So let's do it. Right, so here we are on the spreadsheet, bits of admin stuff to do. So property address can go in here and purchase price. So any cell which is filled in yellow that's for you to input different stuff. So I shall go through that individually, but straight off the top, property address and purchase price, they're the first 2 bits to go in. And then next up, we've got our room sizes and bedrooms. This is where you can either go through the example on the estate agent's listing, or when you do your full proper viewing and fully measure the property, which I always recommend doing because estate agents aren't the best at measuring. You can put the length and the width in, and then it will calculate in square meters the room size. So again, this is where you need to understand from your local council guidance how big rooms need to be, how big en suites need to be, and then you can start formulating plans for this. Top tip here, if you're struggling, I'd spend some time on the planning pool and look at some other developers and what they've done, or maybe just network with them, see if you can have a look at their floor plans, maybe go around their project, ask them. But in this example, we've gone for a typical 3-bed, which we can go into a 6-bed HMO. So in this example, we're going to put 2 en suites and 4 studio rooms, and then that will total there. So that's for you to input there. You input all of these numbers and then it will work out the size of the room for you, and then you need to put your number of en suites and number of studios you're doing as well. Brilliant. Okay, next on to our buying costs. Now all of the buying costs in here are what I have typically used in our property purchase projects before and our HMO project. So I definitely check these for your local area, because depending on your power team, these might be different, but they're not a million miles away. The only one you don't need to change is the stamp duty. You can change the percentage here and then it will up it, but at the minute, if you're purchasing something for 150, it'd be 7% stamp duty. So you can play around with that figure if you're buying a really expensive one and the stamp duty figure is higher. But generally, these are the costs we've used for ours. So again, start doing your network, start doing your research, talk to other investors in your area to see what they're paying for each one of these. And then at the bottom here, you've just got a total of that. So at the moment, our buying costs are around 38 grand. Next up is our build costs. Now again, this is where you need to get real in the weeds with the details on your area. So you need to understand how much conversions are doing, how big your project's going to be. It's going to vary project to project. This is quite an intense one because it'd be a full back to brick. So roughly it my area, you know, we're at around 25 and 25 for a loft and an extension, so around 50. Rest of the refurb with the kitchenette, the ensuite, you know, everything, absolutely everything will be brand new, around 110, which gives us a total of 160. Obviously, I've not added interior design or project manager there. That depends on you. If you want to add that, the options there for that. We didn't use them on our first projects. And then a 15% contingency is there. Again, you can change that. You can change that number if you wanted to go to 10%, if you wanted to go for 20, if you wanted to be super conservative to just see what the lay of the land was. Because again, you always want to be looking for the worst case scenario with these projects. And then if you can survive and live with that, your aim is then to get it way better than that. But you always know your backstop position, which is always prudent to do as an investor. And then you've got your total build cost there, so 184, and that total build plus buying cost is your total build cost plus your buying cost upfront. So that's there, 222 at the moment. Next, we move over to our cash flow forecast section. So again, here, the bits you need to add in are your rents for your ensuite and your studio. So again, this research comes from spare room, from networking, speaking to other investors. You'll sort of know. So here, landed at 700 and 900, and these are going to drive your GDV valuation in a minute, which I'm going to talk about. And then that will then total that up. So it'll do the equation here will be this times how many ensuite rooms you've got, and then down here it will do the same for studio rooms. So 4 studio rooms at 900 is 3,600, and then it just adds them together to give you your total monthly rent. And then your yearly gross rent is £60,000. So that's how much rental income you're getting in through the door before any costs. And that's important because again, that is used for your GDV valuation. So when it comes to costs, again, I've done these based on percentages. So 15% is quite expensive for letting agents, but again, I'd network with the good letting agents in your area, see if they're cheaper than that. For example, our letting agents is a bit cheaper because we're part of a property network, so we get a discounted rate. I think we pay 13% for a fully managed service. So I've put 15 in there rather conservatively, but you can just change that percentage and then it will automatically change it based on that. It will just times the percentage by your monthly rent. Council tax, that's a flat fee, will depend on your area. So I've just put a standard 150 in. Utilities, 11%. Again, I've put that in. We're operating maybe a little bit under that, because we spend quite a bit on a Inspire system for our project. But again, network with people in your area, see, you know, what you're running at for utility bills. Maintenance and voids, again, this is just super conservative, 5% each. Maintenance should be relatively non-existent because it's a brand new property, but things always happen. Things always go wrong, tenants get involved, break stuff, all that sort of stuff. You need to think about that. Voids, again, another thing to consider. What you could also do instead of putting money aside for voids is maybe spend this money on some rental coverage insurance. We did that. It's quite expensive, but you could maybe get rid of this line item in your monthly cash flow. Something to consider. Again, if you want to be super conservative, you can change these percentages. Mortgage rate, so I'll put a mortgage rate based on 6.5%. Again, speak to your broker where a HMO mortgage is at the minute. If you change that mortgage, that will change this number. So yeah, you can have a play around with that. And then insurance and Wi-Fi, again, they're just numbers you need to plug in based on, you know, speaking to insurance brokers and what you think your Wi-Fi is going to be. I mean, that's probably right for a 6-bed HMO Wi-Fi, to be honest, but you can speak to other investors in your area. And then you get your total monthly costs for your mortgage. So you get your monthly net profit, which is £830, and your yearly net profit, which is £9,965. So nearly 10 grand. For me, again, this is maybe a little bit low, but we'll talk about a return on capital employed in a second, because that might offset this. And again, this is where you need to make a decision as an investor, what is most important for you. This return from an absolute point of view, or how hard your money is working for you. So that brings me to our GDV and finance. So we've got a yearly gross rent from here, which is already calculated for you. And then our GDV yield. So this is where this will come from, networking with people in your area, 11.5%. That's just a generic number. You know, I'm not saying that's for a specific area. I don't want to give you any guidance on that because it varies so much area to area, and you need to have real detailed knowledge of your area to understand that. And then your gross development value will be your yearly gross rent divided by your yield. Now, sometimes with this yearly gross rent, they might take 20% off for your bills and stuff like that. Again, understanding who's going to value it, so speaking to your broker is super key here. and you need to get specific on the valuers on how they like to value. But general terms, that's how most of them value it. And then when it comes to your mortgage, you're going to get 75% loan to value. So it's 75% of this. Again, you can change your loan to value amount here by changing the percentage, because that's just an equation of that times that. So if you want to do a higher loan to value, if some lenders would let you do that, I think some do 80, but you are in the risk of being over leveraged there. Or if you're happy to leave quite a bit of money in the deal, you might want to go to a lower loan to value, 60%, 65%. Again, speak to your mortgage broker about that. This is driven by this cell here. So if you change that there, that will change. So if we were to put 7% in there, you see everything sort of changes. Perfect. And then we're then onto our investor funds. So total funds needed. So this is interesting to find out where the cells work. So we've got our total buying cost plus build cost plus our purchase price. So it's 150 plus 222, which gives us 372,000. And then you can play around with interest rates you might be able to offer investors. So let's say you offer 10%. So you'd be paying them nearly 37 grand in interest, which is absolutely crazy. That someone could sit at home and just earn like nearly someone's full salary, which would be a good salary in interest. So the total you'd have to return to the investor would be just over nearly 400,000, well, 410,000, sorry. That's how much you'd have to pay back to the investor. And then we just got some headlines here. So our GDV, our mortgage, investor funds. So money left in or money pulled out. So this is where this is key. So this is the difference between how much money we'd pull out on our mortgage, which would be 391, and how much we need to pay our investor, which is 409. So that means we'd be leaving in £17,895 in this deal. So that's how much we'd be out of pocket to get this deal. So this HMO deal would cost us £17,895. And then the return on capital employed is the return which this 17,000 is getting us. So if you look at the equation for this, it's our yearly profit divided by this. So our yearly profit is just under 10 grand, and we've left £17,895 in this deal. So that means our net return on capital employed is 55%, which is super high. Given your returns from the S&P, it might be around 10%. That is a absolute stonking return on capital employed. And then if you think within 2 years, you'd have all of your money back out, so then it would be an infinite return on that deal. So again, this is where as an investor, you need to decide what is most important to you out of these metrics, but that is the spreadsheet. So hopefully you found that full breakdown and a live demo super useful of the spreadsheet. If you analyze your deals like this, you know exactly what you're getting into before you commit a single penny. And that's the difference between making money and losing a lot of money in HMO. Now you can download the spreadsheet completely for free. There's a link in the description below. Just click it and enter your email and I'll send it over to you. Plus, I'll send you my email newsletter where I share real deal breakdowns and lessons I'm learning as I scale to 50 HMOs. If you're interested in partnering on HMO projects as an investor, I've also got a link to join my investor waitlist. Fill in the form and we'll have a conversation to see if it makes sense to you. And if you found this video useful, make sure you subscribe. I'm putting out more content like this every single week. Real projects, real numbers, and real lessons. Hopefully, no fluff, no hype, just property investing the way it actually works. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. And watch one of these.